to Hooking A. Thanks for joining me again. In my last video I went through the basics of crochet hooks and different yarns and how to choose which ones you need, and today I'm going to show you how to actually get started with crocheting by holding the hook, holding the yarn and starting a foundation chain which looks like this. So first of all, I'm going to show you the common ways that people will hold a crochet hook. There'd be a knife hold or a pen hold. So they're both quite self-explanatory. A knife hold, you're going to be holding the hook about halfway down with your thumbs positioned, with the back part in your palm, as if you were going to cut something. You can see on this hook there's actually a bit of a thumb rest there as well, so you've got a comfortable spot to rest your thumb, but if you don't have that flat edge in the middle, you're aiming for about the middle of it, but where's most comfortable for you to hold is fine. If you want to hold it up here, that's fine. Down here is also fine. And then the pen or pencil hold is holding it just like a pen or a pencil, as if you were going to be writing. So you've got your index and middle finger either side of the hook, and then it's just resting against your thumb there. The main difference is where the movement's going to be in the hook with these. So if you're using the knife hold, because you've got the barrel of the hook in your hand, you're going to have to tilt your wrist as you move the hook around. And with the pen hold, because the barrel is loose, you can use your fingers, the movement of your fingers to move the hook around. So it's whichever you find more comfortable. Then to hold the yarn, the main aim of how you're holding this is to create an even tension as you are working. We refer to this part, the loose part, as the tail end of the yarn, and then the part over here off to the left is still attached to the ball, and that's the working end of the yarn. So when you're holding it, you just want to keep an even tension so that each stitch that you make is about the same size. It doesn't particularly matter how tight it is, just that you keep that consistent. As long as it's not so tight that you can't pull your hook back through, or so loose that you've got great big gaps around the edge of each stitch, unless that's what you're actually going for, because sometimes you might need to do that. But it doesn't really matter what the actual tension itself is, just as long as it's even. For me personally, I like to just wrap it around my little finger like this, and then I take the yarn up over the back of my hand and then over my index finger. So as I'm holding the yarn, I can use my index finger to just hold it like this. If I want it a little bit looser, I can bring my finger forward. If I want it tighter, I can stretch my finger out. And then as it's wrapped fairly loosely around my little finger here, it's not going to pull too tight there and cut off my circulation, but I'm not going to accidentally pull up a huge amount of yarn through and end up with a great big huge stitch, unless I do that intentionally. It doesn't really matter how you wrap the yarn around your fingers or your hand. You don't have to wrap it at all. If you want to, you can just hold it between your fingers like this. You can wrap it around your fingers, your thumb, your wrist, whatever you find comfortable. Just try and avoid pulling anything too tight and hurting yourself or giving yourself a friction burn, but go with whatever's comfortable for you. That is 90% of what you need to be able to do to actually crochet. Creating the stitches and how you use the hook is quite simple, but maintaining an even and consistent tension is actually what the trickiest part is. So if you can do that, you can pretty much do anything with it. So before we can actually start making this foundation chain, we need to create a loop that's going to sit on our hook. And to do that, we tie a slip knot in the tail end of the yarn. You might have heard of a slip knot before. They're used in multiple other things, but put simply, it's an adjustable knot, so you can change the size of it. And we have this knot at the end of the piece because it means once you've actually worked your chain, if that end that's loose at the bottom gets pulled, it won't unravel the stitches that you've done. It will just get tighter. So that means it's nice and safe, and you're not going to accidentally yank all those stitches out once you've made them. So to make your slip knot, you want to leave a decent amount of a tail here, just to make sure that you're not going to accidentally pull the end all the way through. And we'll want to hold this while we're working our first few stitches, just to stop it from moving around too much. So it's better that you leave this too long rather than too short. And we'll make, first of all, a loop like this, and then lift that tail end over. So the tail end of the yarn here is over the working end. Then you're going to take this tail end and bring it under both edges of that circle that you've just made, like this, and then hold that tail end and the working end of the yarn and pull this line here up through the loop, and that's what makes your knot there. And you'll see if I just pull this, this is completely adjustable, so if I want to make it larger, I'm going to pull more of this tail end that's on the right hand side through like this. You'll see that's coming through there. I've got a bigger loop, and obviously it's the opposite to make that smaller. I'm just going to pull it, and it comes all the way down like this. And if you need to undo it entirely, you just keep pulling, and there we go, and it pops out. So I'm just going to show you that flat again. Normally I actually just do it around my fingers rather than doing it on a flat surface. So I'll show you flat again, and then I'll show you how I do it over my fingers, which is a little bit quicker. So the tail end is over here on the right still, and I'm going to take that over the top of the working end like this to make a loop. Then moving the tail end again, I'm going to bring it under this circle that we've just made. So you can see the tail end's now sitting underneath. And then holding the tail end and the working end of the yarn, I'm going to just pull this line up, and the knot's created. It might take a little bit of practice to get used to doing that, but once you've nailed it, you'll find it becomes second nature quite quickly. The way I do it on my fingers is I'll make that loop, that first loop with the tail end that's in between my finger and thumb, that's over the top, and then I actually swap to be reaching down through that loop and just pull that through like this. So I'll show you that one again, just in case that's a little bit easier for you than doing it on a hard surface. So the tail end here, holding it between my thumb and forefinger, crossing it over the working end of the yarn like this, and then my hand's going to come out of that ring and go down through it, and then I'm just going to pull that tail end of the yarn through. So now that we've shown you that, this loop now is going to go onto the crochet hook, and you'll see why we need it to be adjustable now. So obviously this is far too large, so I need to tighten it up a little bit, and I want it tight enough that it's snug, but not so tight that I can't easily pull this back through again, as we'll be pulling a stitch through there shortly. So I'm going to have it about like this, so it can still move freely, but it's not going to be flapping around. This tail end of the yarn, it's just going to hang down out the way. I don't really need to do anything with that other than hold it, which I'll explain in a moment. And then the working end of my yarn I'm going to have over here. So as I was showing you before, I'm just going to wrap this around my little finger like this, up over the back of my hand, And there we go. So where you've got this knot and the tail end of your yarn hanging down, you will need to hold that to stop this loop on your hook from just rotating around it, because we need it to stay in place. If I don't hold on to this and I try and grab this piece of yarn that's over my index finger, because of the way that you actually try and catch the yarn with it, as I do this, I don't know if you can see that the whole loop, there we go, is just spinning around. And that's no good, because I'm never going to be able to actually catch that yarn to make the stitch. So I'm just going to untwist that. So that's why we need to just hold on to this knot here. And you don't have to hold it tight, just enough that it doesn't move. And I'm going to show you how to make your first chain now. So this is my working yarn over here. The tail end of the yarn still coming over onto the right hand side. And I'm just holding this knot gently. So you'll see my hook at the moment is above and in front of the working end of the yarn. And I'm going to swing the hook under the yarn, and then I'm going to tip the handle of the hook towards myself until it's pointing downwards, so like this. And you'll see that now the hook end of the yarn is also pointing down towards my hand. And as I slide this then back towards my right hand, that piece of yarn that I've hooked has gone right up into that edge there, so it's been held quite tight in the hook part. And then we just carefully pull that back through that loop that's already on our hook, and that's your first chain. So I'll show you that again. So I'm going to do the same thing. That's the only thing you need to do with the hook. It's that over and over again to make your chains. So now I've got one chain below and a new loop on my hook. So I'll show you again. Hook is in front of the yarn and above it. It's going to come under the yarn and over it from the back. Rotate that hook to pointing downwards and slide it backwards along, pull it through that loop, and that's two chains. So you just continue with that same motion, pulling through each new loop that you've made on that hook for as many number of chains as you need. Now, when we first started just doing this, I was holding the tail part of the yarn right near the knot. However, as you create more and more stitches, your fingers are going to start moving further and further away from the hook, and there's only so far you can stretch your fingers. So every couple of stitches, I'll tend to just move my fingers up slightly so they're near the hook, just to give me a little bit more control. As you can see, as I'm sort of moving this, I'm sliding that working loop, which is the one that's on the hook, along, just to give me a bit of freedom of movement with the end of the hook. And the yarn is slowly being fed through. As I'm pulling each loop through, you can see that this yarn here is moving slightly, and it's coming up and over my finger, so it's moving a little bit at a time. And this is what you need to do to create an even tension. So if I hold this loose, you can see I have to kind of chase it a little bit just to try and get it. And then when I pull the stitch through, you can see that one's a little bit looser than the ones below it. So I'll do a few sort of quite loose ones just to show you the difference in size that's going to make. Obviously it's the same yarn and the same hook, but I can create a completely different effect just by adjusting the tension there. So you'll see with this, there's gaps now, where we've got these nice little V shapes further down. Now that they've got looser, it's more like a heart shape. And then if you were going to go the opposite end of the spectrum and pull them very tight, so I'm just going to pull that. You can see now this is held quite firmly, and I'm going to try and hold it really, really tight here. I must apologise if it goes out of focus, because I'm actually watching my own hands through the camera rather than actually watching them, and it's a little bit affecting my depth perception ever so slightly, so I can't quite tell when I'm getting it through the hook. But so I'm pulling this really tight now, making some really, really small stitches. So now you can see I've gone from those loose ones to these really tight ones here. Now at the moment it's not such a problem, however when you come to do your first row of stitches you'll be working back along here and you need to be able to get your hook back into those stitches to make the next row. So if it's really tight it's going to make it quite difficult for you when you come to do the next row. So just keeping them nice and even, not too loose, not too tight, and making sure that they're the same size. And then if I just show you what the back of this looks like, you can see you've got this little series of bumps on this side, so it looks like a regular chain with the loops kind of attached together. And for when we go on to the next part, we're actually making stitches. I actually use this to create the stitches in rather than going through the side, which is what you'll see in a lot of tutorials, just because it gives you a neater finish. So you can see you've got the top of your chain looking like a plait and the bottom looking like an actual chain. And then as I was saying before about this slip knot at the bottom, because it's an adjustable knot, it doesn't matter how hard I pull that, it's not going to pull the thread out from here. However, if I pull the other end, I'm just going to try and hold this a little bit closer so you can see. Sorry about the focus, it's not the best camera unfortunately. There we go. So if I pull this end, which is the working end of the yarn, I can pull the stitches out, which is really helpful if you've made a mistake. Any of you that actually do knitting, if you've made a mistake, you've undone quite a lot of hard work if you have to go back and pull out your stitches. But with crochet you can be very gentle and very neat and just pull out one at a time, and you've not then got to try and fit loads of stitches back onto the needle. You just pop your hook back into that loop and that becomes your working loop again, and you can carry on. And when you are actually making something following a pattern, when it tells you, the first thing that it's going to tell you is how many to chain at the beginning. Quite a simple abbreviation, it's usually just CH. Sometimes it might say foundation CH or FCH. It just means foundation chain. That terminology is the same in US as well as UK. They also call it a foundation chain. When I move on to doing some stitches with you, I will explain the differences between the UK and US terminology, as they call their stitches something slightly different to us. They have single crochet in American terminology, and we don't. We go straight from a chain to double. So it just means that our stitches are slightly differently named. So that is your foundation chain, and it could be 10 you need to start with, it could be 20, it could be 200. It depends on what you're actually making. But learning how to do a foundation chain and get a fairly even stitch count, stitch size, it's a good 90% of the skill that you are going to need to be able to crochet. The movement with the hook is pretty much the same. When you come to make stitches, the only difference is that we're going to be perhaps wrapping the yarn around the hook before we're pulling it through. But this movement of being able to just get the yarn up to there and pull it through that working loop and keep that a consistent and even tension is most of the battle. And then just before we finish, I will show you how you can fasten this off. As you can see, I've got done with this one. So when you get to the last chain, or at the end of any piece that you've made, if you're not then going on to make another row and you just want to fasten off and finish the piece, you're just going to snip this end off. And instead of pulling through a loop like this and bringing it back up again, you're just going to pull that all the way through. And in a similar way to the slip knot, you pull that tight. It's not going anywhere and it's not going to come unravelled. So if you can learn how to do this now, you've already made something. You could easily turn that into a bracelet. It's one of the first things that I used to do when I'd teach, especially if I was teaching children. So after their sort of first half an hour or so of lessons, they'd already be able to make something. So if you've got this far and managed to follow everything, well done. You've just made your first crochet creation. And I'll be back in my next video to show you basic stitches of a double crochet, a half treble and a treble. So I'll see you again soon, and thanks for watching. Bye.